So I have here, this is just a JPEG of some symbols that could be useful in your practice. So we're going to make just a few of these and make a symbol library really quick. But all of these could be easily accessible to you in a symbol library, so you wouldn't have to take the time to draw anything like this again. In our Moodle, before we go on to actually making the symbols, oh, these are all brushes. Meg has some handouts on how to make brushes. Symbols are basically just drawing little illustrations, though, and then defining them as a symbol. So I have, on my artboard, I have some images that we're just going to trace over. I only have a few here, so hopefully I'll be able to do this quickly. So I'm going to put them on their own layer and lock it, and then make a new layer for me to actually draw on, and we'll shut off our symbol examples. So I am not going to bother using the pen tool at all in this. In fact, I think for most of these, I'm going to try using shape tools first and see how that goes. That's probably not going to be true for this one. But at least for this one, we can definitely just use the shape tool. So the ellipse, click and drag. Better choice might be to copy and paste this first guy. I had my layers all over the place. So double clicking on a layer and choosing template will also automatically dim the images, which is nice because now we can see the black line a little bit better. So rather than trying to draw a few consecutive lines all together, I am going to do a quick edit copy, edit paste in place. And then we can scale this smaller. If we hold Alt and Shift while we scale, so this is subtle. When I normally just hold Shift while I scale to like the opposite corner. Does that make sense? How it's getting smaller and the part that's staying in the same spot is the lower left-hand corner. If I hold Alt and Shift instead, it stays locked onto the center point. Okay, so that's just the difference between holding Shift and scaling and holding Alt and Shift and scaling, which allows me to stay in the center. So you can do edit copy, edit paste in place, and Alt Shift again to get this last one. I can resize the scale because those were scaled. Their stroke also scaled. So I just want to put the normal stroke on them. That's a setting that I could change, but I'll leave it as is for now. So you can just drag out a star that's about the right size. And I'm going to give this star fill so it's easier to click on, right? You have to click on a line or on a fill in order to click and drag something in Illustrator, right? If I click here, it does nothing, but if I click on the path, it does something. So it's hard to catch little things unless they have fills in them. And now I'm going to use, I've introed this command, which is an Alt click and drag, in order to make all of these stars it's a little bit easier. So if I just hit Alt off of it, like nothing happens, my cursor doesn't change. But if I have this selected and then I choose Alt, I get that little double arrow is coming up. There's like two arrows on my guy right now. See, no Alt and then Alt. I've got two arrows. So if I click and drag while holding Alt, I duplicate it. Okay, so it's like a super easy way to copy and paste. Alt, click and drag, makes an instant copy. So I'm not going to bother getting these into exactly the right orientation, but you could. And maybe there is actually one more line here. So edit, copy, edit, paste in front. And then I'm holding shift and I'm also holding alt so that it scales to its center. So there, we have a pretty nice button there. We can put a white outline on all of them. And then we can define this as a symbol. Sure, looks great. So this is the symbol panel. It looks like a club, like from a deck of cards, that kind of club. And in here we already have a few symbols, and actually if you look down here at this little stack of books that represents the symbol libraries, it does come with a lot of symbols already in here. We have a sushi symbol library. We could drag these guys out. I don't know why it decided that this is what you needed all the time instead of including some cool fashion ones, because its fashion symbols are just like a shirt or this boot. So that's not super useful. I've actually never used any of these symbols. These ones might be handy, like if you were doing something specific, but you could also pretty easily like draw those. So those are options, but we're gonna make our own library and we're gonna save it in like a place that we know. We can save it right to our desktop so that we could upload it onto our Google Drive folders and have it wherever we were working.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like the sidebar where the symbol button isn't on our.
Yeah, so I just collapsed this, so it looks like this maybe, or if you expand it, it looks like this. All of these panels are like super customizable, so you can collapse them and make them really thin, or you can have them like with their letters next to them. This is a nice organized way to do it with the text next to it. Or if you don't have this symbol panel at all, which you might not, or it might literally just be like lost in all of these panels, you can always come up to Window Symbols and it should pop up there. And if it's broken, like if it's out here, you can just click and drag on here and it can put it back in. So I can select this guy and then I can just drag it into my symbols panel, and we want to make a graphic, not a movie clip. I don't know what that does if you make a movie clip, but graphic works very well, and we can hit OK. So I'm actually going to delete the rest of these symbols, and this is true for the swatches and the brushes. You can just select any of these guys and then drag them to the trash can. And now the only symbol in there is my jeans, my jean button. All right, let's do this guy real quick, and we'll do this toggle. Oh, and then I also wanted to do a zipper clasp, and then we're gonna do a zipper brush next. Okay. I don't know how I would do this guy super well. This would probably take me a long time to do really nicely, but if you want to do a very simple frog clasp, that's this type of clasp, is a frog clasp. We could definitely use the pen tool to do it, but I might try using the pencil tool first. I can just trace these. This would be very easy on a Wacom tablet. Of course, I was on a locked layer, so that did nothing. So this pencil tool will smooth my lines out to a certain extent, so I don't have to be incredibly perfect. There we go. It made it a closed shape, which isn't exactly what I wanted, but that's probably fine. And we should just put a stroke on it, no fill, and we can make the stroke thicker so that it covers this whole area, right? And then we can draw a clasp as a knot. I'm just going to draw a circle. I'm going to simplify it. And we'll actually swap that so that it's just filled with black. It doesn't have a stroke on it. So it'll be exactly the right size. So same thing over here. I could potentially like flip this, but I'll just draw it again. Flipping is always an option, but it's straightforward enough to do this. I don't know if I did that great a job. And close. Beautiful. So again, I'll just make that nice and thick. What is this one? 5 points. So something I might do in order to get like kind of that sheen on these, even if I did just draw this stroke as a, I'm gonna make it a little bit opaque so that we can see what's going on underneath. Maybe not that opaque. But to get some of these like highlights going on in here, we could literally just like copy and paste this line and make it small and white, you know, and then start kind of breaking it up into highlights. Do kind of a gray. Right? So that already looks more interesting. And if we wanted to, we could start kind of deleting areas where there were lowlights. I don't know. We could make it all tapered, right? We could throw this tapered line on it. I don't know. Just making it a little bit more interesting. And I'm trying to do this in like easier ways than just straight up using the pen tool. So I'm trying to like reuse the shapes and all that jazz. Grab this color, come back here. We can put a little bit of a taper on it. And we'll make these fully, there we go. So with those symbols, with these guys, I would most likely make them into 2 separate symbols. Actually, this should be on the top. That's nitpicky, but oh, expands. I'm just gonna hit Control Z actually. Okay, right click, arrange, bring to front. So as soon as I bring this into here, it actually becomes a symbol. Even this one that's around, like that was already around, is now grouped, and if we come up here we see this edit symbol and break link, which are indicative of symbols. We're going to go over those in a second, but I'll just define this as its own too. So we'll try tracing this guy really quick. Maybe I can do it with rounded rectangles. I'm not sure. This top part is probably an ellipse, but this bottom part we might be able to kind of rotate this rounded rectangle into the shape. Something like that. With the white selection tool, you can always go back in and adjust these. So where we'll give it, where these like don't look quite right, we could convert this to a smooth point where it has handles on both sides and then adjust like that. That's nice and straightforward. If we want to get rid of an anchor point, if the shape made one too many, we can always grab the minus anchor point tool. Okay, an ellipse for the top. Yeah, so these should have color. There we go. And these will have fill, so we won't see these on top of each other. But again, we can adjust the anchor points. And then we just have like a couple more lines here going up and down and around. But I might even do those just as lines. So these would have no fill on them even in the end. This is just to add dimension. And then we'll throw the circle there really quick. So probably an ellipse. Okay. I'm going to select these and give them both a fill. And I would probably give this a black fill, honestly. That's just to add that depth to it. And then I would draw just a stroke, just a plain old pencil line for this outside line. And I would make it thick and probably white. And if we had taken the time, we could like define a brush as the texture on it. We're going to talk about brushes in a second. But we'll just make it white or gray. Oops. Let me do these other two in the back, and then we'll talk about what if we wanted black lines on the outside of this. Is there a way to do that, Kelsey? And the answer is yes. Okay. There we go. Beautiful. We'll send these both to back. This looks fine, except that this gray line is kind of out of character with the rest of the illustrations that we've done. So we can get a black outline around this gray shape. It's not too hard. We just have to go to Object Expand. We've used this many times for like expanding letters into editable shapes and all that jazz. But Object Expand, we can choose Expand, Fill, and Stroke. And so it's going to take this, which is just a stroke, and turn it into kind of more like an editable shape. See, so now we have anchor lines and anchor points that go all the way around the outside instead of just down the center. So we can turn on our normal, yeah. And if we wanted to, we could even come in and make those edges curved so they kind of curve into the darkness. A nice way to do that on a closed shape that has a fill on it, like this one, is to grab the eraser tool, and then you can just like on the selected shape, you can click and drag around. I'm just trying to show you some other drawing options because like I don't always draw with the shape with the pen tool, and the pen tool can be kind of frustrating. So double click on this to make it smaller. I don't know. I'm just trying to explain stuff. Does that look? How do you think that looks? Good, Kelsey. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Object Expand is all I did. This just has strokes on it. We want it to be a filled shape. Expand, fill, and stroke. And then we can set it to that standard color. Okay. The zipper should go very fast here, and in the zipper we're going to use Pathfinder Tools to make these holes in it so that we'll actually be able to see the zipper through through this shape, especially after we make the zipper brush, which will be fun. So I am going to probably draw around that with this guy. You can always come back in and edit them afterwards to get these things more symmetrical. That looks pretty good. We'll give that a fill. Yeah, we'll give it a fill, and we'll make it a little bit opaque so we can still see what's going on underneath it. So my rounded rectangle tool is going to become this center clasp, and then probably another rounded rectangle is going to become this part. We can then grab the white selection tool and taper it inwards at the front and the back. How easy is that, guys? So easy. Let me make those a little bit opaque or transparent, I guess. And then just a rectangle tool for this guy. And a circle for this section. Okay, so let's get these all 100%. We want to carve through these so that we can see underneath them. Bring this one to the front. So it's looking pretty good, except that we can't see through this part or this part, and we do want to be able to do that. So if I just select them both, I can select them both at the same time. I can choose over here the Pathfinder Tools and just choose minus front. So when you're working, you might want to think, instead of like, how can I trace around this with the pen tool, what original shapes, what shapes is it made up of? Because there are certain shapes where I can use the Pathfinder tool or the shaper tool or the shape exploder. I can't remember what it's called that we talked about. But is it this guy? Shape builder tool or the shaper tool. You can use all of those to union shapes into other shapes. So like this guy, if I wanted him to be one closed shape, I could get rid of this for a second. I could grab both of these shapes and choose unite, and then I would have a shape like that without having to do any pen tool. If that makes sense. All right, so let's define all these guys as symbols and save a symbol library. So we can drag that guy in there. We could name it if we really wanted to. And same for this guy. So now we have these symbols. Honestly, if we wanted to, we could just save this Illustrator file. I could go like File, Save As, and save it as like symbol library. And then an option that would be fine would be to just copy and paste these symbols into new library, into new files. And that is like, that would work. It would be fine. But all of them are more easily transported by saving this library, and then you wouldn't have to kind of open this whole file up. You can just open up this library into a new file. So to save it, to save our fashion library, we come down to this symbols library menu, which looks like a stack of books, right? Stack of books, and we can choose save symbols. And this is going to be pretty much the same for brushes and for swatches, both of which we're going to go over today. Yeah, so I'm just going to save this. It is automatically, it'll probably look like this on your screen, I realized. And it's automatically going to try to save it into the symbols library. And this is like in the Illustrator folder on your hard drive, so it's hard to access, especially where we probably aren't going to use these desktop computers all the time. So click on this little caret and we get everything, and we can choose the desktop, and we can save it as the Fashion Brush library. Now, in here, instead of having to like copy and paste symbols in here, I can just come over to my symbols panel, choose this little guy, and choose Other Library. So we're going to open up our library in a new file. That's what I'm doing. Desktop. Open. And here it is over here. It opens up like with all the other libraries that I opened up as a demonstration earlier. So we can drag any of these out. And just to review, does anyone remember like how symbols interact with each other? If I change this symbol, what is going to happen to all the other symbols? Yeah, they all also change. So let's do that really quick. You can come up to the top and choose Edit Symbol, or you can just double click on them, kind of like you're entering isolation mode. And it was asking me, are you sure you want to edit this symbol? So we'll just put a kind of, like a color on here really quick. And we will hit back. And now both of those symbols changed. If I want to change just one of them, does anyone remember how we do that? We break the link, yeah. So you can break the link, and now we can either double click on it to enter isolation mode, or you have to ungroup a couple times. But we could then, start giving this its own individual color, or we can change the outline of it, and no one would notice, or these guys wouldn't notice. Where if we change the outline of one of these guys, it's going to change the outline of all of them as soon as we do it. Made kind of a weird shape there. Okay. So that's breaking the link or editing the symbol. Depends on what you want. Or you don't have to do it at all. Okay. Do symbols make sense, guys? Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. I also just wanted to include kind of a lesson on further building with shapes. I have lost my time sheets for when we normally end my lecture versus ending. Going to break. We still have time though. I think it's at 2:30 technically. Cool, so we are going to move on to brushes then, which are nice and fun. So I have an example of types of brushes that you would potentially want to make. So we have a button brush, where we're literally just like laying down lines of buttons. You've got an edging brush, a binding brush, stitching, various types of stitching, rope stitching, double needle stitching, scalloped edges. All of these are options, and I have included a link on here to So Heidi's Illustrator brushes playlist, so you can see how she makes her brushes, and I'm actually pretty much exactly going to use her way of making the zipper toothbrush. So if you need to reference that, it's going to be exactly the same as hers. Okay. All right. That guy's locked, but we can just turn him off. So, I'm not going to start off making a zipper brush. That's going to be kind of next. So first off, I'm just going to talk about the brushes panel. It comes with a few brushes pre-loaded. So if I drag out a few lines, we can see that they have kind of a charcoal-y brush, a brush with kind of arrows on it, just some kind of strokes, like generally like painterly strokes. And then they also have a few brushes up here at the top that are really more for if you're like using Illustrator on a Wacom tablet. I think honestly it'll affect like the type of mark that you make. But so we're gonna delete most of these brushes, but it might be, you might want to consider leaving this brush in there. They do include one random jeans seam brush, which is great. And it looks like a really good brush actually. And if we click on this little library panel again, we will see all of the various brushes that they include, but they don't include any of these. They don't include any fashion brushes besides this one. But they do include, you know, just a variety of brushes. But we're going to make more interesting ones. So I'm going to start off, we have talked about pattern brushes. So I'm going to start off talking about scatter brushes and art brushes. So let me get rid of this. Let's say I want to make a confetti brush. I'm going to draw a piece of confetti. I'm just going to draw one piece, and I'm going to give it just a black fill and no outline. The black color isn't going to be permanent. We could actually make it any color. We'll make it green for now. God. Right. So with this guy, I'm going to drag it into my brushes panel. This little tiny piece of confetti, we're making a confetti brush. It's going to scatter the brush all over the place. So we can drag it in there, drop it anywhere in here, and we can choose scatter brush, and you can hit OK. So in here, I have a variety of options. Right now, they're all set to fixed. So if I used this brush right now as is, let me even show you. This will be actually nice. What it looks like with all of those settings on fixed is this, just a standard, like it looks just like a pattern brush. But we can make this much more interesting and much more random by changing fixed to random. So I'm just going to start by changing the size. And on the left, we have a slider. This left slider will be like, what is the smallest possible size it can get? And this right side slider is like, what is the biggest possible size it can get in our random size variation. So the left slider only goes from 1 to 100, where the right slider goes from 1 to 1,000. So you want to move the right slider a lot less, probably. So we probably just want it to be like maybe a little bit bigger. Yeah, so we can already see that just by changing that one, and we have preview checked, that it's adjusted all the sizes. It's like made the sizes all random. So this can get more exciting by changing the spacing to random. So right now, all of these are spread out, at least their centers are all like equidistant apart on the line. And we can adjust it so those are starting to overlap or spread out depending on, you know, what sizes I choose over here. Same thing for scatter. Scatter is where this really gets, you know, nice. We can choose random, and then so on scatter, the left side does go all the way down to like -1,000. So we probably want to keep this still kind of within reason. something like this. Otherwise, you get brushes that kind of go across the whole page, which is fine. It's just kind of wild. Yeah, something like that. And we can also adjust the rotation to be random. So it will adjust all over the place. You could probably max that out. So there is the beginning of our kind of confetti pattern. This does not have random color, so we're going to talk about kind of a way around that. And I want to be able to recolor this brush. We haven't talked about this before, although some of you might have discovered it. Right now, if I hit OK on this brush, no matter what color I choose in here, so even if I choose this purple, the brush that I apply will still be green. Okay, I can adjust that though so that it is affected by my stroke color choices. I'm just double clicking on it to edit it, and in the colorization method we can choose hue shift. Tints and shades will kind of like leave the lightness and darkness values in there, especially if I had more than one shape in here. But hue shift, and this is the color it's picking from. We can hit OK. So that's the color it's going to change. So now we can hit apply to strokes, and that one automatically updated. So if we start overlapping these guys and drawing new lines randomly and applying new colors, we can get a rather effective kind of confetti feel using these shapes. Apply it. If you don't like where these have landed, or if you're doing something like where you've copied and pasted these guys a bunch of times and you want them to kind of randomize again, right? So this one and this one both have pretty much the exact same pattern of dots, where if I just select this and apply the brush again, it will re-randomize it, if that makes sense. Okay, maybe this is too many dots for you and you really wanted all of these dots to be random. There is like kind of an option, which is to expand the stroke. So is it okay that I'm working off the artboard over here? You guys can still see it? Yeah, okay. We've talked about this before, even just a minute ago when we were expanding that stroke into like shapes, right? We were making that stroke into shapes. We can choose expand appearance here, and now this guy is a bunch of individual shapes. But then they also come with this weird box around them, which I don't completely understand. But that's really weird. But you can just double click into them and then you could change the color. I don't know, there's lots of ways to do this. But that is an option to expand it. But it seems like things are then made into these kind of weird shapes then. I don't know. Okay. Does that make sense, the scatter brush? I think that's pretty straightforward. It's just so all of your scatter brushes end up here, and I think I can't remember if your art brushes do as well. But there are my scatter brushes, and now we're going to talk about art brushes. So I honestly don't know when you would use an art brush. Where a scatter brush will apply, it's this guy, where a scatter brush kind of repeats your pattern all over the place and a pattern brush repeats your pattern like right in a row, very controlled. A art brush stretches your artwork to fit whatever length of brush that you drew. So I'm trying to think about when we would want this. I suppose it's probably like these lines. So I'm trying to think of what I should draw. hate that auto zoom thing. It doesn't zoom in the center, it zooms on what you have selected. Okay. So we'll do some sort of brush. Maybe we want stars at the ends of some sort of line, like a wavy squiggly line. So we've got 2 stars, and they're kind of across from each other. And then we've got a wiggly line in between. Beautiful. So with this shape, if we bring this into our brushes panel, and we choose art brush, we have a few options to choose from. Oh, I left this guy. I want both of them. It's very important to my concept. We can see a image here about what it's going to look like. I guess you can swap things around and scale proportionately. Stretch to fit stroke length is how I'm used to seeing this. So we can hit OK. And now, no matter what size line we draw, so I'm going to draw a few different size ones to demonstrate, it is going to apply that artwork and fit it to this size line. Bam. See? I believe if we chose scale proportionately, this one we'll try it. So this one where it's gotten so distorted, if we double click on this brush, and I'll even have preview checked, and now we'll choose scale proportionately, they're going to keep their size right as opposed to stretch to fit between stroke length, which distorts it. So it's the difference between this and that. I don't know what stretch between guides means. I don't know what that does. Like I said, I've never used an art brush in my personal practice. I just know what they do, I guess. So that's art brushes, and now we'll get into the nitty-gritty of pattern brushes. So I am actually going to delete all of these other brushes. And you can delete these ones up here too. And the first, most straightforward brush that we've talked about before is like a gather brush. So I grab my pencil tool, and it's nice to make your brushes not overly large. Like I could very easily draw some gathers like this, but they would actually be a few inches tall, and when you apply them to brushes, they would always apply as a few inches tall, and then you would have to adjust the stroke size, right? Like if I defined these and we applied it to this brush, they would always be a few inches tall, which wouldn't be ideal for our like flats that we would be used to drawing at. I can though adjust this, so if you forget and you make something too big, you can always just lower the stroke size. 0.25, and you can even type in like 0.01 or whatever. That's very tiny. Okay. But we don't really want to do that. I kind of want to design these at the size, so I'm going to zoom in and design them pretty small. And then you can always make them, bigger. I'm not going to use the pen tool. I'm going to use the pencil tool. And I'm just drawing some gather moments. I don't know. So when you think you have a good amount, you can grab them all, and I really like to apply a taper to them, and we can go ahead and make them kind of thick. It's nice. And then grab them and drag them into your brush panel. Choose pattern brush. And I want to take a second breaking down most of the options on here. We generally keep the scale as fixed. There are some other options for, like, if you were on a Wacom tablet, you could make it pressure sensitive to the press of your pen. I think you could affect these with, like, with your stylus wheel, but it's fine. And spacing, we're gonna leave at at 0. It should be fine for this brush. It might be that this piece touches this piece, but that's okay in a gather. It's totally fine. So we don't need to add any spacing. And then I wanted to go over what these 3 items meant. So you see right below these tabs where we have this arrow shape, and let's focus on this center, this one right here. This arrow shape, and then the box is on a straight section, around a straight section. The box isn't on a corner like it is on these ones. So it's literally just our artwork. It's the artwork that we dragged in here, and that means that's what's going to be on a straight line. That's pretty straightforward. To the left, we have what's going to happen when it is on an outside corner. And that's different than what happens when it's on an inside corner. See here the gathers are pointing down, and here the gathers are pointing up, or out, in, out. So it automatically decides what you want on your outside corner by choosing auto sliced, but we actually do have a few options to choose from here, which is better than CS6 used to not do this at all. It couldn't do this. You had to make your own corner tiles, which you might have to do for certain situations. You and I, we had this intense packet last year or the year before where we had to make all of these things, but that was written for CS6. It's almost unnecessary for a lot of brushes. Anyway, we can choose between auto-centered, auto-between, auto-sliced, and these are just different ways of it thinking about getting those 2 pieces to fit onto 1 piece at a corner. Auto-overlap is the laziest one. It just takes the image and it puts it over itself. So auto-sliced or auto-centered or literally any of these is fine. And we would probably never be putting a gather on a corner. It probably wouldn't happen, but I'm just using it as an opportunity to talk about it. So same thing for this tile. It doesn't automatically fill it out, but your inside corner tile, you can choose between auto-centered or, all of these options. These 2 are for what if you wanted it to have an arrowhead, or what if you wanted this stroke to have a feathered end, something like that. You can have totally separate artworks for these end pieces. Maybe we'll go over that at some point, but it's not necessary. You can also flip it along the x-axis. We'll get to this again when we do the zipper. And then I'm going to break out of here and go over these individually. The colorization method I already touched on in the scatter brush, but if you want this to be able to be the color of your stroke line, we want to choose hue shift method, hue shift. And now we can choose, the key color is the black color, so that's what would change. There's no other color in here. Maybe in the zipper we could talk about that further. So we can hit OK. So I'm going to apply that to a line, and then I'm going to break back into there and explain something further. So put that on a stroke. So that looks good. If I ever want to edit a brush that I've already made, I can just double click on them. So with preview checked, we'll be able to see any changes we make on this brush that I've applied it to. So we're going to change it from, Okay. Right now, this brush is on the stretch to fit setting. So where this line that I've drawn is longer than my original graphic, it is stretching my graphic to fill up the whole space. If we choose add space to fit, watch this difference, right? So right now it's stretched it out, but add space to fit, it leaves the graphic exactly the same size, and it leaves like awkward amounts of space on the ends, which would not be good if we wanted like the gather to go all the way up to the edge of our flat, right? Like you would want it to on a waistband or whatever. So that's good, and we can hit stretch to fit. I can't remember what approximate path does, honestly. Stretch to fit always works really well. Okay, so we have a gather brush. You can delete this bad gather brush. Really quick, I'm gonna make like an elastic gather brush. So this is kind of the brush that you would use if your garment had a waistband and it had been gathered there, and it's kind of like an open gather. But what if you had an area that was totally rouged up by elastic, like through a panel? And it's even good to have a reference image like we've been using, elastic waistband, something like this one. That'll be good. Yeah. These pants are super ugly though. I guess they're pajamas? So sorry for using them. But they will give us a nice gather. We want to make sure that when we draw a brush, this is important because a lot of people, when I then had them do the in-class activity of drawing brushes, they drew them at angles, and that can make things complicated. So I'm going to turn on my guides, my rulers, turn on my rulers, and then I'm going to drag out a guide. And I'm just going to adjust this until like at least a little bit of this image is on a straight line. Cool. And now I'll probably throw this on its own layer. So for this type shape, we would probably want to make a kind of a top line and a bottom line, and then draw the gathers in between so that it looks like a nice closed area. So I'm going to grab the pencil tool and zoom in on this terrible image. Sometimes low quality images are nice to trace over because they make everything like really basic, like you can only see lights and darks. That's okay. Oh, let's make sure that those have stroke. So same thing, I'm just going to draw these gathers top to bottom. The pencil tool is kind of annoying because sometimes it like starts lines over that you didn't want it to if those lines are selected. But so it's important for pattern brushes to look relatively seamless. So before I drag this into my brush panel, because this has to like line up end to end, I'm going to take a second and adjust one end or the other. So I'm actually going to group this. It's not totally necessary, but like I want it to stay together. And I am going to copy and paste it and move it to the left. If I Alt-click on it and then also hold Shift, I will move it exactly left to right. And we kind of want the bounding box lines to bump up against each other there. Do you see what's happening? I've got that. I'm dragging it to the right. I'm holding Shift so that it's in exactly the same place. And I'm waiting for that pink line to tell me I've got things lined up right. So this is what it would look like this seam is what it would look like if we applied this as a brush right now. So we can take a second to adjust this side so that it lines up perfectly. Or I'm actually going to adjust the left. Whichever side you choose, just make sure that that is the symbol that you then drag in. And you're only going to adjust one side of your little symbol. Otherwise, things will get wonky because you won't know. So I can click and drag on this and just drag it up there. So I'm literally just going to drag these things to meet the edge. And now select and drag into my brush panel. I think I made it kind of large, but that's okay. I guess potentially we might see a gather on a corner. It doesn't really matter, but we can choose auto-centered anyway to get that filled out. You really only need these first three, and actually looking at these brush panels, that's what these four initial symbols are. I think that this is outer corner on the far left, inner corner on the far right over here, and these center ones are the straight lines. I'm not sure why there are two. And then I think that these two empty spots are for your start and your end graphics, if you did have those in there. Cool. Hit OK. And then what a lot of people do after they define a brush is they immediately try to apply that brush to the graphic they just drew, which looks insane. And it's pretty much always going to look insane whenever you do that. So you do need another line. Beautiful. So I don't want to go crazy here. Are there any other brushes besides the zipper brush that you guys want me to do really quick? All right, we'll move on. There we go. So I have already made sure that these zippers are flats. We want them to be flat. A lot of zippers, like when you Google images of zippers, they're almost always at an angle. They're never flat because, I don't know, I guess that would be a boring picture. It's really exciting to put zippers at an angle. So make sure that they're flat because when you drag them into your brush panel, whatever angle they're at is going to be the angle that they're applied to a line in here. So it can get kind of a jagged look, right? If I drew a rectangle like this and defined it versus if I, oops, oh, I made a mistake. Let's give that a stroke. If I drew a rectangle like that and defined it, I would have just kind of a solid rectangle line, but if I dragged it in like this and I defined it as a pattern brush, we would get this jagged shape. Okay. So you only need to draw one tooth. Don't waste your time drawing more than one tooth. I am going to draw it very quick, and I'm not going to bother reflecting it so it's perfectly symmetrical. I'm just going to draw it. I am going to use the pen tool to draw it. I'm going to make sure I'm on my own layer, though. Let's lock this, double click it, and make it into a template. Okay. Click, 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 click and drag. If I hold shift while I'm clicking and dragging, it'll make sure that my handles are like perfectly up and down, which leads to more cleanly kind of uniform lines most of the time. So I can come back in and clean that up and try to get it a little bit more even. That's pretty good. Whenever you think you have it right, we can, we're going to use another box in order to define how much space there is. I have mentioned before that when you define these brushes, you can choose from spacing. Like we could add a little buffer in between each of the graphics that we have defined. But when you're doing this, you're generally kind of estimating how much space is in between them, and we want it to be very precise. So I'm not going to use that. I'm going to draw another separate rectangle, and we're going to make it have no fill and no stroke. And we'll just give it no fill for a second. This line should go exactly through the center of this kind of gap, and the center of it should hit the center of this upper tooth. So it should be kind of centered on the upper tooth and on this gap. And can get rid of the stroke on this as well, and now it won't show up in our pattern at all except as being the perfect amount of space. Okay, we're not guessing, we know it's the right amount of space. So we can drag it in there and hit pattern brush, and you can see that we have like a good amount of space in between each of these, and we can hit OK. So if I now drag out a brush and apply this guy to it, you can see how exact that is, even by like trying to match it up here. It looks pretty good. Maybe I added a little bit too much space, but it'll be fine. So now we are going to do the closed brush, right? We need a brush for a closed zipper and a separate brush for the open zipper. Right now we only have the open zipper parts, right? So we can apply the brush to that one and the brush to this one. This one's backwards. We'll hit that in a second, how we fix that. And we need a brush for where it comes together, right? We need this closed brush. So let me zoom back in here. It's always good to click on something before you zoom. So I'm going to copy and paste this brush just so I don't mess it up by accident somehow. And we are going to copy and paste this so that it's up top here. So probably just copy and paste it twice. And then right-click, arrange, or transform, reflect. And we can hit OK. We don't need to copy them. They're good. We can bring them up here. So whenever you think that these look good, we are also going to use a bounding box to define where the seam is. Right now, if I drag this in here and I make a pattern brush out of it, we're going to have this kind of awkward shape, right? It has the all three of them on it. It doesn't look anything like a zipper. And we would have similar problems if we just brought, like, it might kind of make sense to you to just bring these two in, pattern brush. But again, it's not going to be, like, there's a gap in between the teeth. So we have to use what's called a bounding box. And we really do actually want to make sure that these are perfectly lined up. Shift and drag it over. Okay. Get rid of this for now. The bounding box has to be just like this one. We could maybe even use this bounding box. It's going to go through the centers of these shapes. Gotta go through exactly the center of them. And then it has to be at the back, and it also has to have no stroke and no fill. And if you do all of those things, if it's at the back, if it has no stroke and no fill, and if it's lined up correctly, it will clip the brush. It will get rid of this outside piece of the brush. So I'm going to adjust this until I see that snap to function, right? So it's snapping to the center. See, it's got that pink line. Snapping to the center, same thing over here, snapping to the center. And because these are the same shape, like where we only have the right side of the shape here, it'll perfectly line up with the left side of the shape over here. Okay, and then this bounding box, object arrange or right click arrange, send to back, and also no fill and no stroke. So now with all of those things selected, including the bounding box, the invisible bounding box. We can delete those. All right, we can drag this guy in here. Pattern brush. And we can already see that that looks more appropriate and more like a zipper. And when I apply it to this brush, you can see a beautiful zipper. Hooray! I think I drew this a little crooked. All right, really quick, how we have these set up right now is that they will always be white and black, and no matter the color in here, they're always going to be white and black when I apply these lines. So we can change that, and we can also change which color in this graphic is the one that changes color, if that makes sense. So if I double click on the pattern brush and we choose method hue shift, it automatically changed because I have preview checked. And right now the key color that was chosen is that white that's in the center, so it's changing the white. You wouldn't want to do this for the brushes, but if you wanted another color to be the one that changed, you can just choose the eyedropper tool and then click. I think you have to click on this little thing until you find the right color. There we go. So we could hit OK, apply the strokes, and now the opposite seemed to happen. I don't know why it changed both. It's very confusing, actually. But that is that. So let's apply it to this guy. And we made a symbol earlier of a zipper pull, so we can get that on there. And notice how you can see the zipper through the zipper pull, which is really nice. Now this is the last thing before I go over how to do your homework. This zipper is facing the wrong way, right? We can change that, and we can also change other brush options, but just for this stroke, so like without changing all of the brushes. Just for this stroke, you have that stroke selected, and then you come down here into your brush panel, and you go Options of Selected Object. I didn't really know this existed until very recently. Options of Selected Objects, you click on that, and then we can choose Flip Along, so it instantly changes to the right size. Yeah, it's just pretty straightforward. So that's Options of Selected Objects. Okay, so that's all of our brushes. Do you guys have questions about brushes? Any brush you want, like if I, for whatever reason, wanted to make just one of these pink, like maybe you have a super cool zipper that has like detailed teeth, we can expand this or any type of object like this by going to Object, Expand Appearance. I know I already discussed this, but it seems like each group then has a clipping mask around it, or maybe this is the path that we drew. But we can just like double click into these until we can actually access the graphic. Okay. So really quick, your homework, if you didn't do the sketches last night or this past week, you're going to do 12, I will update Moodle to reflect this, but you're going to do 12 sketches of possible looks that'll be due next week for this client project. And we're also going to make the colorway for the client project. So this is really easy. The colorways are pretty straightforward. I'm going to have you do 3 total colorways. So your main colorway that is like the designs, the colors that you actually want the garments to be, and then you're going to have 2 sub-colorways. And I think next week we'll talk about kind of how we could lay that out so we could display the different colorways, especially when you're designing a collection that is mass-produced or like ready to wear. Having multiple colors of the same garment is definitely something that happens, so it'll be good to practice. Okay, so I made this design board last week for a fashion illustration project, and I'm just going to grab some of the colors off of it. So I just brought this in here. It's just a JPEG, and I have drawn some squares that I'm going to fill with color. And then we're going to talk about making different colorways also. This should be review. But with this square selected, if I grab the eyedropper tool and click on a JPEG, it will lift the color out of this JPEG. So there we go. So we can keep doing that, clicking on them and choosing the eyedropper and lifting some of these colors out. We definitely want a dark in there. It's kind of a dark green, that's nice. And red, a bright red. Maybe one of these blues from this guy. Let's do a couple more. Another green. And kind of a really light color, a really light white or something. I'm looking over on the left or on any of like my color picker moments, and I can move the eyedropper around the page until I find the exact color that I want and lift it out of there. So we have these colors. There are a variety of ways to edit them, but also maybe I don't really like this colorway. Maybe picking the colors out of here wasn't the best option. I can choose my favorite color from this piece, maybe this kind of minty green. And we're gonna go over using the color harmonies. I'm actually going to copy and paste this whole section. So I'm holding Alt and clicking and dragging to copy really fast. Clicking and dragging. So this will be my first colorway, this will be my second colorway, and this will be my third. But we'll actually make them all standard whites for right now. Yeah. Okay. So with this color as my the color that's like in my swatches, I am going to find, I think it's called the color, can't remember, color guide or color themes. Yeah, color guide is good, and color themes is another option, which gets more involved. I use the color themes sometimes, but honestly, it might be connected to Adobe Creative Library because it doesn't seem to be loading. And in my experience, it does take a long time to load, even when it does load. So we'll use the color guides. So when I choose a new color here, I have to then click on it in here often to set my color harmony rules to this color. So like I would click on it and it would adjust. So with this selected, I can click on it And then I can choose from a variety, by clicking on this caret over here, I can choose from a variety of color rules. So this is a really nice way to make color harmonies nice and quickly. So maybe I really like this high contrast one, but this that it shows me is actually kind of garish, like the amount of saturation in there and like just like like a ton of color. But it gives me all of these shades and tints of my color options up there. So for this next one, I could choose kind of this lighter purple, and then I could choose kind of a duskier purple. You know, I can fill in these colors with choices that they don't have to be like the super saturated ones that it shows you up here. Come on. Maybe we've already done that one. And then we'll choose a really dark one. Right, so I'll do it again for this color. It'll be more straightforward with a really bright color. If we choose this guy, I'll just grab it just for an example. Then we can make it the current color in the color guide, and we can choose between all of these rules. But instead of just choosing the most saturated versions, which doesn't look that nice, we can choose from like all of these shades and tints. And we can choose some saturated colors, but we don't have to. Okay. Another option, that one's not that great. Okay, doesn't like it. There we go. Another option for making colorways is to use the color picker, is that what it's called up here? Recolor artwork tool. So I just copied and pasted these swatches so that I can see them again, and I can come up to the recolor artwork tool, which should be familiar to you guys. You can't undo in the recolor artwork tool. I always change this to be exact instead of preserved tints. What preserved tints will do is, like, if I tried to change this kind of duskier color to a bright color, it would try its best to keep it dusky, although that did not seem to happen. Right, you can't undo in the recolor artwork tool. You have to start over. Anyway, I always change it to exact so that we know that, like, whatever color we pick, it's not trying to keep it tinted or whatever. You can come over to edits. You can just click on these and choose new colors, or you can go over to edits, and I like to link the harmony colors, and then we can adjust the whole thing, and we can like keep kind of the color relationships that we liked up here, and just grab some new colors, right? So that's an option. We're going to talk about swatches now. Making colorways is old hat, right? Yeah. So let's say this one is my main colorway. Actually, let me delete these. This is from the last class. And what this normally looks like, and just in case also, this is a good lesson, sometimes you open up an image or something in Illustrator, and if your image is just black and white, then you'll end up with only black and white in the swatch panel. It happens. I don't know, it just does happen. And we can get all of the swatches back by going to the swatch library down here, default swatches, and art and illustration is the one that like automatically gets loaded at the beginning of the screen. Yeah, so that's probably what it would look like normally. So that's what it would look like normally, but we want to make a palette, and this is going to be your homework, is to screenshot this palette that you made with just these colors in it. So I'm actually going to select all the colors and drag them to the trash. And now I am going to add these colors. We know probably that we can add a new swatch to the swatches panel by selecting a color, whatever color is in your highlighted fill or stroke. Whatever color is in there, you can choose new on here and make a new color. And it adds it. But that would be really tedious to add 18 different colors or whatever to this, and then to maybe organize them into folders, which would be another step. So we are going to automatically upload them into folders. So I can select all of these. And notice my new swatch is grayed out, but new color group is there. So we can click that. And we don't want to do selected swatches. We want to create this color group from the selected artwork. We can hit OK. And there we have a folder with our color groups in it. So same thing for this guy. All I did was select it, and then I choose new color group folder, and we can choose, selected artwork. Okay, this one added, because some of these have a black stroke outline, it did add this black color that we can just drag to the trash if we don't want it. Or we could take a second before defining these to make sure we choose no stroke fill for all of them, and then it automatically would do that because black wouldn't be in there at all. Just dragging them in there, which is what you're going to want to do, is going to make a repeating pattern, right? And that's not what we want. We want little organized folders of our groups. So select it, and then, Okay, so then what I would love is for you guys to take a screenshot of it. Command-Shift-4 is a screenshot on a Mac. Oh, I didn't actually make the folders, but I want to see the 3 folders in there with your 3 colorways, and that's what you could upload to Moodle. So I want you guys to practice making folders and swatches and libraries. This is pretty straightforward, but we could also then save this as its own library that we can then bring into whatever folder we're working on. So swatch libraries menu, save swatches, and we can save it just wherever, to the desktop or wherever, so that we could upload it onto our Google Drive to bring home. So this would be like client project colorways 2. Okay, so one of these is going to be the one that you're working with mainly, and the other ones are going to be kind of subcolors for your other looks, your colorways of the same looks. Does that make sense? Did I miss anything? Okay, so that's your homework, and you're also going to do, and I'm going to update Moodle, you're also going to do 12 sketches, 10 of which are going to be made into your flats. This is a quick project. This is due the week after next week. So starting flats this week, while it's a relatively light homework, would be wise. It's not required, but it would be wise. Okay. I'll update Moodle and we can go over that again. So let's take a break now till 4.